I want to ask you a few tax questions, but first I just want to ask for your thoughts on the president's remarks yesterday. He's gotten some criticism for morally equating the white supremacists in Charlottesville with the counter-protesters. Is that acceptable to you, and what are your thoughts? Should he denounce it more strongly?
He should denounce it more strongly. It's not acceptable to me. The president needs to make sure that he's not giving any refuge or comfort to the neo-Nazis or white supremacists or the Klansmen. There is no room for those views in the public square. They're finding refuge in what he's saying, and he needs to be unambiguous about it and denounce them.
What is the most important piece of enthusiasm that you're encountering for tax reform from the public? Where is the enthusiasm coming from? We did a poll last month in Bloomberg. Only 4% of Americans said this is their top issue. Where do you get the jet fuel for something this ambitious?
The jet fuel comes from the idea of simplicity and buoyancy from an economic point of view that comes as a result of this. Think about in our own lives the premium we place on simplicity. If I'm from the Chicago area, we go through the I-pass lanes for the tollway. You go here, you go there. You want a far simpler system, and we can have that with tax reform. Out of that, though, it's not simpler just for the sake of simplicity, but it's simpler for the sake of economic growth.
One of the things that Democrats are talking about is this so-called not one penny campaign. They're saying there's not public support for tax cuts for the highest 1%. What's your response to that, and why not take that off the table to deprive them of that political weapon?
I don't think it's really a poignant political weapon. I think the name of the game is to say, how do you create real growth? In my remarks a couple of minutes ago, I said what we tend to say is when people are successful around us, we say, how nice for you, because we realize that there's a benefit that inures to us in our own community. So moving forward, I think it's very significant that we just say, let's lower these rates all the way around and not play the class envy game. And there's just not much of a percentage in it in terms of trying to satisfy. Once you start chasing that, it never ends.
Are you in favor of ending the state and local tax deduction?
So I've got to look carefully at state and local taxes because of my home.
Right.
I'm from Illinois, and that's a significant thing. What my constituents are interested in, what's the totality of their tax liability at the end of tax reform? So if their rates are lower, if we get rid of the AMT and do some of these other things that we've proposed, what I'm working for is to make sure that net, the bottom line is that they're going to be better off from a tax point of view.
And the issue of repealing the estate tax, doubling the standard deduction, these things, at least the standard deduction, that would be good for the middle class to double that. But one of the indirect effects of that would be to reduce an incentive to give to charities. Are you concerned about that?
I'm not concerned about that because I think it's a very difficult argument to make to say, well, we're going to give people more of their own money and then direct them how they spend their own money. I have a lot of confidence in the American people to make decisions. We're at the place, Ronald Reagan had most confidence in the American people to make good decisions all the way around.
And lastly, where are you on the carried interest rule? President Trump called on the campaign trail for eliminating that, at least not taxing them at a preferential rate. Why should they get that preferential rate?
So there needs to be a lot of discussion around that for all the obvious reasons. So there's nobody that's doing a candlelight vigil for the hedge funds, frankly. But what you got to make sure is that we're not having a negative impact on some deals, a local real estate deal and so forth. And so we want to make sure that we treat this carefully, and that's part of these negotiations to make sure that we get that done.
Without a border adjustment tax, how do you deal with base erosion?
So it's harder, but it's not impossible. And so what we're interested in is trying to figure out how it is that you come up with a good anti-base erosion rule. We can do it. We had a preference to move forward with border adjustment. That's not going to move forward. So rather than worrying about it, we're going to rub some dirt on it and figure it out.
Mr. Roskam, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.